bag. Stop running. Hey, you! Stop where you are!
Mind telling us why you're running, sister?
Because I'm late. I have class in 5 minutes.
But you can't run like that, miss. When you run, your rear end jiggles. It's what you call immodest.
Well, then stop staring at my butt! This is ridiculous. She looks the same from every angle. We're studying anatomy, and all we can see is her enormous beak.
All students must report immediately to the main assembly hall. Those who fail to attend will be suspended for 2 weeks.
It is our obligation and our duty to behave appropriately. It is from the blood of martyrs that the flowers of our revolution have blossomed. To behave shamelessly is to trample on the blood of all those who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. That is why I ask all the women present here today to refrain from wearing wide-legged pants and makeup, and to begin wearing longer headscarves that cover their hair entirely. If there are no questions, the meeting is adjourned. Yes?
You say that our veils are too short, that our pants are indecent, that we wear makeup, etc., etc. As an art student, most of my time is spent in the workshop. In order to draw, I need to be able to move freely. A longer headscarf would make it all the more difficult. You also criticize us for wearing wide-leg pants, even though they hide our curves effectively. But knowing these pants are in style right now, I pose the question. Is religion concerned with protecting our modesty, or is it just opposed to fashion? Your criticism is always directed at women, but what about our brothers? They're allowed to dress as they please. Sometimes they wear clothing so tight you can see their underwear. I just don't understand why, as a woman, you don't think I'd be affected by the sight of men in skin-tight pants, yet you're worried they'll get turned on by a few less inches of veil?
So it's right. Why, you practically snipped off their little thingies. Will you please take off that god-awful veil? It makes me claustrophobic.
I'm so used to it, I forget I'm wearing it.
Don't ever forget it. Fear is what lulls our mind to sleep and makes us lose our conscience. Fear is also what turns us into cowards. But what you did took courage. I'm so proud of you.
Hello and welcome to Book versus Movie. This is a podcast where we read books that have been adapted into movies and then we try to decide which we like better, the book or the movie. I am Margot P. of coloniabook.com and this is my good friend and co-host, Margot D. of Brooklyn Fit Chick.
Hi, everyone.
We have a very exciting, extremely timely, although it's 20 years old at least, book, ridiculously relevant that we're going to be covering today. But if you are brand new, we talk about movies that have been adapted from books mostly. But when the pandemic started, we decided to do a brand new episode every single week. And so that means we've expanded what we mean by the term book to include really any literary source. It might be a magazine article, it might be a song, a play, or in this case, a graphic memoir. So we'll be talking about Persepolis in a little bit. If you're new and you have suggestions for books and movies, especially we're coming into the holiday season, we're doing Disney in December. We're still kind of looking for ideas for this month. We're kind of kicking things around. If you have books and movies that you would like us to cover, you can make those suggestions, meet other listeners of this podcast, and interact with us on the internet in a few different places.
Yes, we do have a basic Facebook page. Be sure to like it. We post all the episodes there, but we're much more interactive in our Facebook group. It's a private group, and we really do just talk about books and movies there. It's just type in Book vs. Movie Podcast Group and ask to join. We're on Twitter, as long as Twitter still exists, at Book versus and Movie. We are also at Instagram, Book versus Movie. Please follow us at those places. I also, Margaret, I forgot to mention, I set us up at Mastodon. We'll see if that becomes a thing. I saved us a place there.
Okay. Is that a new social thingy?
As of like 48 hours ago. So
okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, it turns out free speech costs you $8 a month.
We'll see. Everything is sort of fast and loose. And so anyway, those are the places. Also, we have an old-fashioned email. Turns out that's still going to be there with us 20 years from now, 20 years hence. So bookversusmoviepodcast@gmail.com. We do ask that the literary source, and it could be a book, a magazine article, a play, it needs to be pretty easy for us to get our hands on it, and the movie needs to be on a major streaming service. Send us your suggestions. You can once again do it in any of those places. Also, if you would like some stickers, please send us an email. We'll be happy to send that to you. Margaret, I just want to say thank you to people who just joined us. I was on a few different shows to promote my book, Filmed in Brooklyn, and I want to say thank you to The Dork Forest, where I got to talk about Stephen King books, which was so much fun, and The Animal That Changed You, where I got to talk about my kitties, Maximum Film, book and film podcast, and Big Mood, Little Mood with Danny Lavery. So thank all those people for letting me be on the show to talk about my book.
Yes. And again, it makes a wonderful holiday gift for the movie lover in your life. If you're listening to this podcast, I assume you love movies.
Yeah.
And maybe you have other people in your life who also love movies and you don't know what to get them for the holidays. It's a perfect gift. Filmed in Brooklyn by Margot Donahue. Just saying.
It's available everywhere. It's even on Kindle.
And if you really enjoy our show and you want to help keep us in books and movies, you can also, yes, you can support us on Patreon. It's true.
We got a new member this week. Her name is Amy, but it also said Amory in her email, but I believe she goes, it's Amy. So Amy, thank you very much for joining. We have over 100 episodes there. We're putting everything from 2020 and previous to that. We've been doing the show going on 9 years now, it's going to be. And so we just put up The Secret Life of Walter Mitty. We just put up a whole bunch of Stephen King episodes, but we have a lot of great episodes up there. And it just really helps us with books and movies and just the basic upkeep of the show. Thank you so much for doing that. But we ask, like, if money is tight, and we know the world's a little topsy-turvy these days, please just tell a friend about the show, or wherever you get your podcast, if you can leave us a review, that'd be great. And in Spotify, you've been great. You've been hitting stars for us, which is great. Also, Good Pods, we've been doing really well on Good Pods. But wherever you get your podcasts, thank you so much for reviewing for us, and or just enjoy the show. Really, that's why we do it.
Yeah, that's really just the main thing. We're just glad you're here.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the we have to just kind of, you may be listening to this at a different time, hopefully a better time. Yeah. I hope so. There's a few things going on in our world right now, but the big thing that's going on in the United States is on this coming Tuesday, we have a very, very important election. And so this is your little PSA from me. Mm-hmm. I'll just speak for myself. I am going right after this. I am flying up to San Jose in Northern California from San Diego to get out the vote. I'm volunteering my time for a few days to go up there and go door to door, remind people. If you take nothing away from today's book and movie, do not sit out democracy. We cannot take our democracy for granted. You know, we'll talk about it as we get into Persepolis. I mean, we've all heard there, when you read this book, you hear adults saying what we hear adults saying all the time. Like, oh, it's not going to happen. Oh, they're not. They say that, but they don't really mean it. And then the next thing you know, things go real bad, real fast because they can. So please, to paraphrase the late, great Leslie Jordan, we won't tell you who to vote for, but we will tell you to vote. Please vote. And that's the end of my TED Talk. Thank you for coming. Now, the other timely thing that's going on in the world is this situation in Iran, which is straight out of the pages of Persepolis. I read Persepolis when it first came out. That was, I think, pre 9/11. Right? Wasn't it? It had just come out when I read it.
It came out in 2000, the first one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I read it at the time because I was interested, because I live, you and I have both spent a lot of time here in California. California has a huge Persian/Iranian, depending on what generation they are, expatriate community. And so I have always known Persian/Iranian refugees all my life. And I read this book because I was interested in learning more about what happened, and particularly because it was being told by someone, we were just saying before we got on the air, she's our age.
Right.
So that really interested me. And it really helped me to understand, because I'd heard, as you will see in this book, you know, there were so many sides to this fight story. and it can get confusing. And I, growing up, from the refugees, some were on one side, some were on another side, somewhere in the middle. And so this book really helped me to kind of crystallize the timeline and how things could have unfolded the way that they did. Did not think that 20 years later, we would be seeing what we're seeing now, this time of upheaval over the very issues that are described in this book. But let's talk Persepolis. If you've never read it, it's a quick read. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful, the artwork is absolutely spectacular. And so expressive, but it is what we call a graphic memoir as opposed to a graphic novel, which is, of course, is fiction. So a graphic memoir along the lines of They Call This Enemy by George Takei that came out recently. And a few years ago, the late Congressman John Lewis had a graphic memoir called March, both of which I am recommending to you. But let's talk about today. Let's talk about today's author, Marjane Satrapi.
We should also say that...
Or is it Marjane?
I've heard it pronounced both ways. I mean, she's
Okay.
French and Iranian, so you can, pronounce it either way. I mean, Marjane. We should also say, like, she's our age. I mean, we grew up in America and we heard one story when we were kids.
Boy, did we ever.
Right. And
Wow.
so when there was in 1979, when there was the revolution, I remember I grew up on the East Coast. Margot grew up on the West Coast. There was a girl who was graduating high school, and her family had fled Iran, and she was the valedictorian, and she was not allowed to graduate as valedictorian because she was Iranian, and because of what there were hostages still. And this was the kind of culture that we had, and the students protested. And they said, no, she's our classmate and she deserved this. But the adults were arguing about it. And it was a very confusing subject. And it's a very confusing. We're not experts, is my point. Like, we were.
No, not by any means.
On films or
we
books
are at best
Iran,
armchair historians here.
Persian history. So we go into this, but we do, we're thoughtful people and we really try to become kind of semi-experts in things. And so Marjane Satrapi is a very fascinating woman. She's a graphic novelist, a cartoonist. She's a director. She's French and Iranian. She grew up in Iran, and her family is from a family of activists. Her great-grandfather was a Persian prince, and her father was a photographer who would photograph events that were going on in Iran. Which was forbidden to do. Forbidden to do. Her mother raised her to be an activist. Her mother raised her to think for herself. And you can find, especially I used to be into Pinterest, and you could type in Iran pre-Shah of Iran or pre the Ayatollah 1979, and women wore miniskirts, and women had jobs, and women were living their lives. The Shah of Iran was not a great person, by the way. That's sort of like people sometimes think like, oh, that it was a mistake to let him be overthrown. No, but he was a CIA.
Not necessarily. It's complicated. Yeah,
it's a very complicated history. The CIA backed this person to be in charge of the country. He threw very elaborate parties for heads of state around the world and didn't necessarily take care of his own people. So there was a reason why the Iranian people did not want him there anymore. But it wasn't, some people didn't understand that having an Ayatollah in charge probably wasn't the best idea either. And it changed the culture of Iran. Women went from being able to wear whatever they wanted to now having to wear a veil to cover their bodies.
And to be professionals and study what they wanted. And
listen to music. Marry if you want to marry, not marry if you didn't want to marry. It was not be religious if you didn't want to be religious. And Marjane talks about this. Like, she didn't grow up particularly religious. As an adult, she says, I'm an atheist, and I've 20 years ago, it wasn't a big deal. I would tell people and they go, oh, okay, or I'm agnostic. And she says, now all of a sudden, even in America, I get people who get upset with me for saying that word. It's so funny. A word can just totally upset people or your ideas. It's funny. It's old as new again.
Or a strand of hair.
A strand of hair. She was a kid in Iran, and then the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and then there was this idea that, okay, things are going to be different now. Her uncle that was in jail got out of prison, and then the Ayatollah was put in charge, and then she's showing us over time there was this religious fanaticism that took over that people said would never happen because people really wanted democracy. And her family warned against religiosity taking over the culture. It didn't. It did take over the culture. Her family got caught up in all kinds of the political things that happened in the government. Fanaticism took over. She saw her family members become executed. People became martyrs in the street. She was then thought it was best for her because she was very rebellious, very smart, and she didn't like wearing the veil, and she didn't understand it. She didn't understand why her mother all of a sudden had to wear a veil and cover herself and couldn't speak up for herself. Her mother was very smart. And
yet they were being told that they were more free.
Yes.
In the process as
Gaslighting.
These things are being imposed on them. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I'm doing a very short version of this, but she eventually, as the author, let me just speak for the author. She had a quickie marriage when she was like, a starter marriage, let's say, didn't work out. She did get remarried. She lives in France, I believe, but she was educated in Austria. She always spoke French at home, by the way. Very intelligent family, very educated family. She speaks multiple languages now. She often speaks about Iranian issues because she basically wrote something that for people our age and younger can then understand about Iran, because she mixes pop culture and a female perspective with history, with news history, because we always got it from these news angles and cameras, and it's like, well, what is this all about? Where she sort of explains it from a very human point of view. This is what happened in my family, and this is what with my neighbors and my family and my friends. She was sent to a school for a while, and she had it pretty good, and then she had a bad love affair, and then she wound up being homeless, and then she came home, and Tehran was taken over, and there was the Iraqi war. I mean, there's just so much this woman experienced in her life, and it's so interesting, her perspective. And thank God she's still alive and she's still with us and can still talk about it. We put in one of her interviews in our Facebook group, which is where we normally, like I said, we encourage people to join it, because that's where we like to put, when Margot and I are doing research, we go, ooh, this looks cool, and we put it in the Facebook group, and we like to discuss it there. But that's our author, and it's the film, we should say, that the book did very, very well. It's 2000. It's called Persepolis. I'm sorry, I wrote down the definition for that. It's the Persian city.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Polis meaning city, and Persep meaning Persian.
Right.
Yep.
And then it's sort of like, it's Persepolis 1 is the book in red, and that's the story of a childhood. So it just goes up to where her family sends her to Austria to be educated, because they're worried what's going to happen to her, because she likes to wear jean jackets and sneakers, and she gets into fights, and she doesn't like to be told what to do.
She's slowly getting in. She's rebellious. I mean, she's
14.
But, I mean, rebellious, if we look at it by United States standards, like, who would call that rebellious? But
she'd be a hall monitor. I mean, basically, like, she's not even.
Yeah. For where she is at that time, she's getting in increasingly more serious trouble,
right?
By simply being herself,
and could get her killed or her family,
and asking questions any child would ask.
In 2004, we see the release of Persepolis, the story of a return. And then there's the movie that comes out in 2007. So she directs that, she storyboards it. She's a brilliant artist. It's gorgeous, like Margot said. It's incredible. There's a French version of the movie, and then they made an American version with American actors. Not, I thought for sure Tony Shalhoub was going to be in there.
Feel
like, really, Sean Penn, Iggy Pop, okay. But fine. But so if you're streaming the movie here in the States anyway, I don't know what your situation's going to be outside of that. But you basically, if you're going to do it legally anyway, you're going to have the French version, which is, I didn't mind it at all.
It was great.
Yeah.
Oh, it was spectacular. Yeah.
Because that's her voice, by the way. That's her original voice. That's how she spoke at the time. But I did find clips in YouTube that were in English, and that's what I'll play throughout the show. But the original book, which is what we'll talk about, but with the movie, it goes up to when she gets married. And I think after she gets married. But right?
Yes, I think even she's divorced.
She divorces him
She's
pretty quickly
divorced
in
and
the movie.
she's leaving Iran as an adult this time by her own choice.
Right.
But we only read the first book to prepare for this, although the movie, as Margot just said, it covers both of the books. Yeah, I mean, this book, it's so interesting because I read it when it came out 20 years ago, and I loved it. And it's beautiful. Like, you can't read it and not get sucked in. But reading it today was a real gut punch. You know, I think you just can't escape the significance of these events and how, you know, in the United States, and we have some listeners who are not listening from the United States, but so for those of you who aren't from here, but U.S. consumers of media have such an isolationist perspective that we are partly our own fault, but also partly cultivated that way. You know, a lot of people benefit from us not realizing what's going on in the rest of the world and our role in it. You know, like when I'll try not to get too political, I promise. And
it's hard not to.
I'm really going to try. But, you know, for those people who are like complaining about the gas prices are up all over the world. Like most of these things that people are complaining about as being quote unquote U.S. problems caused by our U.S. leaders are happening all over the globe right now. So please learn about what's happening in the world.
And it's always more expensive for gas all over the world. Every time I've traveled, it's always been twice as much.
Yes.
Always.
So and you know, the events that are going on in Iran right now, I was going to talk about that war, but let's talk about what's happening right now. You know, when you read this book, it makes it very easy to kind of draw the through line between what's happening today to what happened in the 90s, to what happened in the 80s, to what happened in the 70s, and even before that. And, you know, our country and a lot of Western countries are up to our elbows in this situation. What we see, you know, we have a role that in this, it's not something that's happening to other people independent of us, which is true of most world events, no matter what nation you're from. You know, as John Lewis, again, to quote, to bring up John Lewis again, as John Lewis used to say, like, we're all in the same boat. There is no other boat. There's just the one boat.
Right.
We are all in this together, and everything we do it impacts somebody else, and maybe not in this country, but it does impact other people. So again, yet another reason to vote. Got one more in there. So let's talk about Persepolis. Let's just talk about this book. It's such a great book. Oh my gosh. First of all, the cover, I just can't get over the cover. I just want to frame it and put it up in my house.
I bet you we can. I'm going to go to Etsy and see if there's something.
You can.
I bet you that, yeah.
Her drawing of herself, as a little girl, if you don't know what she looks like, the whole thing is very evocative. But this looks exactly like her. Like she's with these very few, it's very spare. The artwork is very, you know, almost minimalist, I would say. Black and white, very kind of thick lines that she's drawing with. But it's so evocative. And this little girl looks exactly like her. It's just perfect. Like the lines of her eyes are just exactly right. And the eyebrows and everything are just exactly capture her. And everybody else in her family as well. But it's a very cinematically kind of drawn book. As you flip through it, it's like a storyboard of a movie, really.
Can I read a little bit of the introduction? I really appreciate it. Okay, so I'm just going to start here. In 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh, then Prime Minister of Iran, nationalized the oil industry. In retaliation, Great Britain organized an embargo on all exports on oil from Iran. In 1953, the CIA, with the help of British intelligence, organized a coup against him. Mossadegh was overthrown, and the Shah, who had earlier escaped from the country, returned to power. The Shah stayed on the throne until 1979, when he fled Iran to escape the Islamic Revolution. Since then, this old and great civilization has been discussed mostly in connection with fundamentalism, fanaticism, and terrorism. As an Iranian who has lived more than half my life in Iran, I know that this image is far from the truth. This is why writing Persepolis was so important to me. I believe that an entire nation should not be judged by the wrongdoings of a few extremists. I also don't want those Iranians who live their lives in prisons defending freedom, who died in the war against Iraq, who suffered under various repressive regimes, or were forced to leave their families and flee their homeland to be forgotten. One can forgive, but one should never forget. And that's Marjane Satrapi, Paris, in September of 2002. And
so that would have been written right after 9/11.
Right.
Which was another very contentious anti-Islamic time.
Right.
Gosh. So, yeah, I mean, this is very much part of our American history. And as we mentioned last week, I think this is significantly, talking about our generation specifically, we were not taught this history in school. Because it was happening, it was too soon. So it wasn't included in any of our history books. It wasn't included in any of our history curriculum. And therefore, any information about what was going on in this story at this time, Margot and I got from television.
Right.
Really, right? Which was not impartial.
No,
not at all. We were, of course, like the great heroes of the situation, rah, rah, rah. And what's wrong with these people over there? Why can't they get it together? So and we are not, she and I, of course, are not Iranian. We're not,
right.
We're not from there. We are outsiders looking in. And so having an insider's perspective on this situation is so, so important. And this is yet another book that has been banned quite a bit.
For that reason.
Right now, being in 2022, this book is being banned. And I don't understand how you can, just like with Slaughterhouse-Five, I don't understand how you can ban a book that is about somebody's lived experience. It's not a work of fiction. And Slaughterhouse-Five, just to be clear, Slaughterhouse-Five is a work of fiction, but the portions of the book that lead to its being banned are the parts that are from Kurt Vonnegut's real life. Similarly with this in Persepolis, this is her life.
Right.
How are you banning her life? What?
Right.
I don't understand it.
She was in the 70s. She was growing up in this regime. And as I was saying, the Shah of Iran threw these lavish parties, millions and millions of dollars to impress foreign dignitaries. There's all this oil that's underneath them in this country.
It's a lot about money. It's all driven by money. Yeah.
Right. And there's people there that are starving, and there's people that are, why aren't you investing this money into the ecosystem of the people and their culture? And there's a lot of resentment going on there, and eventually that's going to burst, and it did. And so we also, funnily enough, we did also talk about Argo last year, which is also somewhat about that. I mean, it was the Canadian.
Yeah, it was. Right. But it was also part of this whole big story. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And when we were kids, we were, the nightly news was like terrifying at 6 o'clock, wasn't it? I mean, it was.
Oh,
Jonestown,
I mean, it's no wonder that you would live in a place that would ban a child who happened to be of Persian/Iranian descent from being validated from something that she earned.
Right.
Right. But that was the climate, and that's something that, like everything in history, but let's just talk about the U.S., like racism in general, but, anti-Semitism. And, we have these waves of hate. I don't know what to call it.
A group of people.
Because it's convenient, usually economically, for some other people. So, yeah, I mean, it was really bad that, people who were here fleeing, literally like refugees from the very situation that people were up in arms about in the U.S., and then being held accountable, being held responsible as though they were the ones who like what?
Yeah.
You're fleeing the regime. We should be putting our arms around these people, not treating them as a surrogate, as an effigy for the hated, regime. And that's exactly what happened. And it's happened, periodically throughout our 20th century and 21st century history.
It continues to happen. Yeah.
And it continues to happen.
They come here, legally from Venezuela to Texas. They get shipped to Florida, then they're shipped to Martha's Vineyard. And it's okay. We're trying not to get too, but you can't not be political about this. You really can't.
When people politicize it, it shouldn't be political. But anyway.
Yes, but it's
anyway. But again, we have to talk a little bit about politics because that is what the book is about as well.
It's exactly what it's about.
And it's what's so beautiful about this book, this one in particular, both of them, but this one in particular, is that she is telling it from her child's point of view. Very similar to the way that George Takei's graphic memoir, They Call This Enemy, he's also telling it from his 5-year-old child's point of view. And you see this little child trying to make sense, like, oh, we were told in school that the Shah was chosen by God and he was the best guy ever. And now my same teacher is telling me to rip the pictures of him out of my book. Okay. And now it's death to the Shah. And the Shah's out and we're happy, but oh, wait a minute. Now we're really not happy because these things are happening. And it's, it doesn't make sense. You see the adults struggling to make it make sense. And then having to try to explain it and make it make sense to their little girl who they're terrified for and trying to protect. And I love the whole thing about her conversations with God.
Yes.
And it says a lot that she's growing up. It opens where, the Shah is still in power. And as Margos said, like the Iran at that point it's like partly in the modern world and partly not yet. I know people who were in like beauty pageants in Iran at that time before the revolution, and like with swimsuit competitions and
wow.
And women who were doctors, all kinds of things. But she's growing up, and her family's not that religious. So she's sort of getting religion kind of the way my kids have, sort of culturally, like, oh, there's prophets. Well, I want to be a prophet. Mm-hmm. Oh, how do you be a prophet? Well, you talk to God. She doesn't think twice about it. She's a little girl in this very like anti little girls being prophets for sure. And she goes to her grandma and her parents like, I'm going to be a prophet. And they're like, oh, great. I'll be your first follower.
Sure.
And she has these little conversations with God and she gets angry with God. And I really like that those little moments in the book are very, because they occur as her consciousness is evolving and as her struggling to make sense of what these humans around her, these adults around her are doing to each other. So I love all those sections of the book. Are really she's having to learn. I mean, American children we're very much, just speaking for you, we'll just talk about our generation. I want to talk about, because my kids, it's different, I have to say, but you and I were not, and even to the point, like our parents' generation had something they had to learn called, civics. Is that what they called it? Mm-hmm. Civics, where you learned about your role in a democracy and voting and your responsibility as an American citizen. Our generation didn't get that. Like all of a sudden civics kind of went out the window when you and I went to school. And so we were very much kept in the dark about what one's role in one's society is or could be. We were even to the point of, again, now getting back to John Lewis, we weren't really taught very much about the civil rights movement, which had happened just before we were born, and how that had happened and how that had evolved and what really, how it changed. Most Americans' knowledge of, there's a study done somewhere that most Americans' knowledge of the civil rights movement is 9 words: Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, Rosa Parks. And that's all they know.
Right.
So, but this little girl in this book, like from a very, very young age, is being taught some extremely sophisticated political discourse as just a part of her regular curriculum, which I think is really, that I found fascinating.
Especially considering, like, during our lifetime, 18-year-olds were allowed the right to vote, and they don't consider that teaching civics in like 11th grade, even like 11th, 12th grade.
Like you have this amazing right, but we're not going to tell you anything about it.
Right.
And we're not even going to like tell you how to register to vote per se.
It's very, very, yeah. Because my parents, I don't know about yours, like mine took me to the voting booth. I mean, we didn't go inside the booth.
Oh, well, my mom was, full disclosure, I worked for the labor movement and my mom was a union organizer in the teachers union. So yeah, we were a very politically conscious, active family. But even then, like I was not learning that stuff in school.
No, my mom was the president of League of Women Voters in Nassau County. So my parents were like, yeah. And my grandparents had the little booths, like they volunteered and everything like that. But they had to do it on their own. I had to learn from them. We didn't get taught this. 18 years old, they didn't say to us, hey, you know how to register to vote? No, nobody did at our schools, the public schools, Anyway, that's getting off my horse there, my high horse. But anyway, she's very young. This big thing happens, and it's the Shah of Iran. And so now they have an Ayatollah in charge. And then gradually what happens, like I said, the women have to be covered. The women have all these rules are now against the women. The men get very aggressive towards women that don't follow the rules. She has a story in there about her mother and a man shoving her mother against the wall and says, if you don't cover yourself up, you are open to men wanting to F you in public, and with her daughter right next to her. And I think just like in the words, and she spells the
all
words
in the name of women being more respected, supposedly.
Right, yeah. Right. That's showing more respect. And wear a veil, not wear a veil. That should be your choice. That should be your decision. Yeah. That should be up to you. That should not be the law. That's my point. That's what I think. And her mother didn't want to wear one. Her mother is infuriated that she's being humiliated by these dum-dums that are just like forcing this on her. And she's trying to raise her daughter to be a strong person. She's trying to raise her daughter to be her own person. And her daughter kind of thinks like her dad doesn't think her dad was much of a hero. And she really, Anush, her uncle, is somebody she really idolizes. He was in jail for a while. What happens is once the Shah is kicked out, a lot of people that were in a jail get out of jail. And then there's all kinds of uprisings as they bring the Ayatollah in, because there's all different ideas of what's a democracy? Is it a republic? What do we do? Do we have a religious person in charge or do we not have a religious? And then they decide to put a religious person in charge, which is not a good idea.
Well, it turned out not to be a good idea. But again, and I always wondered about that. Like, why was that the choice? But when you read this book, it really helped me understand a lot better, I can see how if you were in the middle of that at the time and there was so much instability and so many of your fellow citizens are not going to get on board unless there's a religious figure running the show or appearing to be running the show. And so I can sort of imagine how in that framework, you would think, okay, well, let's just try this for now and see where it gets us.
But it was not great for the Jews that live there.
It didn't work out for a lot of people. Many yes, I do know some Jewish refugees from Iran, and it was really
not great.
Just not good.
Not good. Anyway, so there's all kinds of chaos going on there, and she's super close to her grandmother who tries to raise her with some principles, and it's decided we should start going into the movie soon. It's decided that she should go to Austria because she speaks French, and there's a school there, a lycée there, that she could be safe because they want to protect her. And
yeah, because as we said before, she's getting into more and more trouble, which is going to lead to her, she's getting to be the age where they could just straight up snatch her. They could just execute her.
Right.
And worse. So they managed. They're a little bit, I wasn't quite clear on what the father's job was, but they seem to have some kind of connections that they can call on, and they can arrange at least for her to leave the country. And they've got family in Vienna or friends that she can go and stay with. So they sent her off, and the book ends with the parents sending her off at the airport. She is 14 years old, and they do not know if they're ever going to see each other again. And I am bawling my eyes out. So that's how the book ends. Although, and we're making it sound, I feel bad because we're making it sound like it's a total downer. There is so much humor in this book also. There is a tremendous amount of humor, and she shows how the adults have these clandestine parties.
Yes.
Which are which can literally get them executed, and yet they persist in having these parties and being there for each other, even at great risk to themselves. And so, in that way, this book is extremely hopeful, extremely upbeat. Even today, as I am despairing over over the world and what's going on, this book really gives me a lot of hope, and I recommend it for that reason as well. It's not as we're talking about like all the sad parts and the hard parts, but there's a lot of really amazing, uplifting, inspiring parts of this book that you will never forget.
I should also say, like, she also discovers pop culture, and that helps her define herself. So she discovers Michael Jackson. She gets into the Bee Gees, Kim Wilde, We Are the Kids of America. You know, does she write "Punk Rock is Dead" or something?
Punk is not dead.
Punk is not dead on her jacket. She wears Adidas sneakers. She gets into Iron Maiden, like she's really into speed metal for a while, like, and she goes in the black market to find these things, and she's cool to the other kids, like, because she's just like, she takes that little extra risk. She's an individual, and she's smart, and she's cool, and she finds these little ways to
and
find
she
joy.
has a family. She has a family who
her.
supports her in that, which is amazing in itself. You know, had she been in one of these other families that are fully on board with the regime, if they exist, I only have met refugees, so I've never met a family like that that's like way behind what's going on. Who knows what would have happened to her? You know, I don't even want to think about it, but she has this amazing supportive family who really put their necks on the line for her and make a very difficult decision that, you know, although it's very hard for everybody involved, including her, you know, it does keep her alive. So, so that's how the book ends, is they're sending her off to Vienna. And then the second book covers her adulthood, or her young adulthood. And that's what the movie is. It's the two books together.
So let's take a quick break. We'll play the trailer, then we'll talk about this movie.
I live down the block.
In the middle of a revolution,
Margie, go to bed now.
Marjane is growing up.
Stevie Wonder.
Julio Iglesias.
Nail polish, lipstick.
Iron Maiden. And about to embark
What's with the punk shoes, huh? What's this on the back of your jacket?
on an amazing journey of discovery.
Right, you better get going.
No more crying. Europe is waiting.
You lived through a revolution and a war?
Well, yeah.
Wow.
So it's true what people say. Iranians have no manners whatsoever.
She told him she was French.
Now, in a strange new world, as her country changes forever, so will she. From Marjane Satrapi's best-selling graphic novels
I love you.
comes the story of a lifetime
In life, everyone always has a choice.
about finding the strength
Never forget who you are.
and the courage to be true to yourself.
I've worked 20 years for this country.
The Birth of Venus is one of his most important works.
I repeat, stop running.
It's what you call immodest.
Well, then stop staring at my butt. Dare me to take my veil off?
You wouldn't dare.
The movie was released in Cannes at the Cannes Film Festival in 2007. It was widely praised. This is such a great movie, by the way. I forgot how much I enjoyed it.
I'd never seen it. I had never seen it before. I had only read the book. I thought when the movie came out, and at the time I had like a tiny child. I wasn't going to the movies then, but I remember thinking like, well, how could you take that because as I said before, like her drawings are so sparse and everything. Like, how could you animate that? I was very skeptical about it. The animation is spectacular.
It's worth it just for that.
So good.
Yeah,
it's so good.
She's one of the directors. There's also Vincent Perronneau, and he's also writes the screenplay with her. They have some great music in there. There's, like I said, there's a great scene where she sings "Eye of the Tiger" and does aerobics to it.
Oh, it's just so awesome.
Yeah,
this movie is so good.
Yeah, this movie does start with the fall, and it also just illustrates beautifully like the history of Persia and what happens.
Yeah, let's not forget this is the oldest civilization on Earth. And so, all the stuff that we're talking about in many ways is a blink of an eye in their very, very long and storied history. We're not, again, here in the U.S., we're not really taught very much about it. We know about the Tigris and the Euphrates, and that's about it. It is quite an impressive history.
Sorry.
So yeah, we are very ignorant here about it in the U.S., but I agree. I love the way that the movie gives you this, a taste of this very important, globally important history, and before bringing us into the time of the revolution.
And it gives her more of the full story. So it's both of the books basically that are in this movie. And it continues when she leaves and she goes to Vienna. So when she goes to Vienna, her dad had to get a passport for a relative to get some operation. I mean, everything to get out of Iran.
It was so hard.
It's so hard. It's so challenging. And so to get her someplace else was a big deal. And for some reason, her mother's friend that was going to take her in said no, or just changed her mind at the last minute. Maybe she got scared. So then the worst thing that could happen to her was that she was sent to this Catholic school, and she didn't speak the language. And so she was in a room with a German girl, and she didn't speak, French, and Marjane didn't speak German, so they just smiled at each other a lot. And she kind of figured her way around, and just like in life, she wore her punk rock shirts and listened to her music, and she found her people. To them, she was super cool. Like, oh my God, you lived through a war? Like, you've seen destruction? Like, because to them, those were abstract concepts.
Sure. Yeah.
But she was the one who had actually been through it. And it delves much more into like the other relationships that we have. We give much more time with her grandmother. Her grandmother's a huge influence in her life. I love the lavender that she wore in her bra to make sure that she had like the scent.
Jasmine flowers.
The flowers, excuse me. How much, and also there's so she's there. She goes to, and she meets a guy, and this is also a downfall of a lot of really great women, but we're a little insecure. We just make some really bad choices in our late teens. She falls in love with a doofus who treats her badly. And I love how handsome he is, and then he cheats on her, and then he becomes this ugly doofus in like the next shot. I love that.
In her memory.
She remembers
him as like this disgusting oafish. What was I thinking?
And then she falls in love with the other guy, and it turns out he's gay, and so it's just like they become good friends. But then she winds up, she's so brokenhearted, and she's just, she winds up in the streets in Austria, in Vienna, excuse me, and she gets bronchitis, and she falls asleep in the streets in the park, wakes up, and she's in the hospital. She has a chance to go back to her family. She said, please don't ask me any questions. And she's like 16 or 17 at this point. They say, yeah, come home, no questions. We just want you home. So she's been away for about 2 years. She comes home, and a lot has changed in Iran. Now they're in a whole other war, and she's clearly depressed. And clearly just, she's a poor thing. She's just a teenager, and they give her all kinds of drugs to kind of like get her to come out of it. And she's just watching TV, and everybody comes to meet her, and she's just a different person than she was before. And she wants to wear lipstick, and she wants to have the freedoms that she had when she was in Europe. And
she's lived through a lot of trauma at this point, like a lot. Yeah.
And she's still, here she is in Iran, and it's even more strict than it was before. And at one point, she's walking through the streets. She has lipstick on, and she's testing her boundaries and testing her freedom. And unfortunately, she sets up one guy. The cops are like, what are you doing here? Who are you with? And she says, oh, this man was just flirting with me right now. I'm trying to get away from him. And they beat up this poor guy who didn't do anything wrong. And she tells her grandmother, and her grandmother is just completely ashamed of her. And that's the worst thing that you could do. So she proves herself to be human, by the way. She's just trying to prove herself, she wanted to earn her grandmother's honor. She's a very human person. In the movie, we get to know her uncle Anushin. That's Iggy Pop. So I guess she's a big Iggy Pop fan.
The country experienced a period of euphoria. Everyone had been a revolutionary. Everyone had fought to overthrow the Shah. Even our neighbor's birthmark miraculously transformed into a war wound. Our school teacher, once a fervent admirer of the Shah, instructed us to tear out all images of the royal family from our textbooks. Political rallies were sprouting up everywhere, and the domestic enemies of yesterday had become the nation's new heroes. It was within this climate of blissful chaos that one evening Uncle Anush came into my life.
From here on out, things can only improve. Nothing can stop the will of the people. We can now build a better society based on justice and liberty. Lenin was right when he predicted the proletariat would one day prevail.
Uncle Anush, how long were you in prison?
9 years, dear.
For real? Longer than Lally's dad? How old are you? Are you married? Are you a communist?
Margie, give your poor uncle some time to digest.
Margie's always asking questions.
You're right, too. It's a good thing to be curious.
Have you digested yet?
Margie, that's enough. Time for bed.
Why?
It's all right. Why don't you get into your pajamas and I'll come tell you all about it.
What do you think's going to happen with the elections?
I have faith in the people. After putting up with a dictator, they'll do what it takes to preserve their freedom.
Well, whatever the outcome is, it can't be worse than the Shah.
I'm ready. You can come now.
In the story, and it's just more about she listens to Michael Jackson. She's trying to adjust to her life, and she starts dating a guy. And basically, if they want to have sex and they want to have a relationship where they can actually hold hands in public, they need to get married. And there's one point where they're driving in a car together and they get pulled over, and the cops take them to the station and say, you need to pay a fine or you'll both be in jail. And so the father has to go to the jail and pay a fine. And that's where they're told, if you want to hold hands in public or whatever, you better be married. And so she marries this guy, and it turns out to be a terrible relationship. And then she gets just the good news that just divorce him. And her grandmother says, I was married once. I didn't like it very much. He was a jerk. So find somebody else. And so she
has this amazingly supportive family who really, and
family.
They really try to get her help. They get her a therapist, and they really are trying to do everything they can for her. It's really amazing.
We also should mention that there's a lot of time. She does talk about suicide. She does talk about because she's clearly depressed. She's been through a lot of trauma. She's been very hurt by people. She also tries to understand politics and what would work best for people. And so this is probably another reason, I'm sure, in some parts of this country, she explores Karl Marx and communism and talks about it, like God and Karl Marx talking to her in her dreams, which I'm sure would give people a heart attack in some parts of this country.
Yes. I mean,
Lenin, not John Lennon. I mean,
Lennon.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, if any of those people ever actually read any history about these, I mean, the people that, yeah, anyway, I won't get into it.
Yeah.
I just say that yes, that's one of the reasons why the book is banned.
It's one of the reasons. She and quickly, she goes, she divorces this guy. She's still in Iran. There's a party that she goes to, and the police raid the party. And as Margos said, people want to have parties. They want to drink alcohol. Not everybody, but some people do. And they want to get together. They want to have fun. They want to listen to music. Everybody has, different needs inside them. And you can't squash that, people. And so she eventually realizes, I got to get out of Iran. I'm not going to make it. And her family agrees. And so she has to say goodbye to everyone. And so she's going to leave for Paris or Switzerland. She's going to leave. Says goodbye to her grandmother, knowing it's probably going to be the last time, which is just stupid heartbreaking. I mean, it's just, no. But she's a wonderful.
And then I think one of the last lines, it must be also in the book, I'm sure, but one of the last lines of because the book ends with her, her landing, back in Europe, and everything that happens in Iran is in black and white, and then everything that happens in Europe, I think, is in color, or mostly in color. Everything in the quote unquote present day of the movie. But yeah, she says something like, I have my freedom, but freedom always has a price, something like that. And that's really what the whole book is about. It's absolutely gorgeous. It blew my mind. The quality of the animation, it just tells the story so well, and it keeps the quirky style of the book and the humor of the book in a way I wasn't expecting it to. And I'm looking forward to watching it again with my kids and see what they think.
Yeah, I mean, it ends on a very hopeful note. I mean, like I said, she lives in Paris now. She speaks multiple languages now. She's extremely intelligent, and she's very happy. But she's speaking. So what's happening in Iran now is a lot of women and girls are saying, "I'm not wearing this veil anymore. Where was this revolution? It's been 40 years now. What are we voting for here? It's our turn." And they're finally getting men to back them up and say, this isn't
There's a lot of people being, political prisoners again. And it's a very difficult situation. But, and as she says, I think in that interview, and this is what I've heard from all of the Persian and Iranian refugees that I know here in California, is, when you say, well, what can we do for help? The main thing that people always say is spread the word about what's happening, tell what's happening, because there was such a media crackdown by the regime. So even people who are in Iran are not getting updates on what is happening except on the social media of their friends and family. So the more that we spread journalism about what's going on, the better informed even the people who are going through this will be. So, it's no small thing to share what's going on.
Yeah, that's all we can do. It's beautiful. I honestly, and I could not pick book versus movie. Absolutely.
Nor I. They're both such beautiful works of art. It's definitely a tie. They're both, and you just want to do both. You just want to read the book and you want to watch the movie, and each one enhances the experience of the other. It's a tie. Yeah, for sure.
And we had a lot of listeners, at Facebook, people in our Facebook group talking about it and how much they love this book. And some of them were former teachers that said that their students love this book. I mean, it's a beautiful book. And why is it banned? I mean, but yeah, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And it's a tie. And definitely. And the French version is great. It has Catherine Deneuve as the mother.
The mom, who's like such a great character. The performances in we only watched the French one. I love all the performances, the grandmother and the dad, and everybody it's so well cast. Voice performances aren't like the easiest thing to do, but Catherine Deneuve is the mom. I just love it. I can't even talk about it. I just love it so much. So yeah, it's a tie. It's a tie. Read the book, watch the movie. You will not be sorry. Gosh, it's gorgeous art all the way around. It's just beautiful. So let's talk about what we're doing next.
So what we're doing next is we're going to the New York Times, back to 1980, funnily enough. Father of a chess prodigy. I keep writing press prodigy, and it's a chess prodigy. We're talking about the movie.
Press prodigy.
Press prodigy.
That's Ronan Farrow, isn't it?
I think that is, actually. He is a prodigy. He's in the press. It's chess prodigy, and it's Searching for Bobby Fischer. The movie is available everywhere, and the article is very available. We'll post it in our Facebook group. It came out in 1980. The movie came out in the 1980s, and we're very eager to check this out. And Margot is going to be up in San Jose knocking on doors, getting people to vote. So good on you for that.
We'll see how it goes. I like doing that. I actually really enjoy doing that when I get the opportunity. So I'm glad that I'm able to do that.
My old stomping grounds.
With your local folks. Get involved with your local little elections board, or I forget what they call it. But yeah, be a poll volunteer, or just put a sign out in your yard, just telling people to vote.
Yeah,
you don't have to pick a side. Just encourage people to vote.
Yeah, that's democracy. True democracy, everybody. Okay, so please follow us on all those places we mentioned previously. Please send us your suggestions for books and movies. If you would like a sticker, please send us an email at bookversusmoviepodcast@gmail.com. And Margot, where can they find you?
You can find me online at coloniabook.com, and all of my social media callouts are at She's Nacho Mama. And where can they find you and your book, Margot Donahue?
You can find me at Brooklyn Fitchick for Twitter and Instagram. My site is brooklynfitchick.com. My TikTok is at Margot Donahue, and you can find Filmed in Brooklyn wherever you get your books, and it is available on Kindle now as well, and it makes for a great Christmas gift if you know anybody that likes movies and you want to look for a good gift for them. We will be back soon with the father of chess prodigy / searching for Bobby Fischer. I knew I'd get it right. Thank you so much for listening to the Book versus Movie podcast. We are a part of the Frolic Podcast Network. You can find more podcasts you will love at frolic.media/podcasts. We follow the hashtags LadyPodSquad and Podern Family. If you want to support the show, you can go to our Patreon page, go to Patreon and look for Book versus Movie podcast. We have a basic Facebook page, but we also have a private Facebook group. Go to Facebook and type in Book vs. Movie Podcast Group if you want to join that. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Book vs. Movie. Spell all those words out. If you'd like to send us an email, it's Book vs. Movie Podcast, spell that all out, at gmail.com. You can follow Margot D at Brooklyn Fitchick on social media, and Margot P at She's Nacho Mama. Thanks so much again for checking out our show, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.
There you go.